So much to talk about. For more on the Government of National Unity and the budget impasse, we speak now to Business Unity South Africa's CEO, Mr. Khulekani Mathe, joins us in studio. We will also chat with SACP spokesperson, Dr. Alex Mashilo, via video link. We also have SAFTU spokesperson, Newton Masuku, joining us, and political analyst, Sandile Swana, joining us as well this evening. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. There's so much to talk about, Mr. Mathe, and I think I want to start here. Just as the business community, a great place to start is you watch the impasse, the dealings you've got, for instance, the sort of words that are being used by GNU partners, the Democratic Alliance, for instance, releasing a statement, and even a poster where they've called Action SA sellouts for, coming to a sort of agreement with the ANC over this budget. Just when we talk firstly about GNU stability, business's biggest concerns at a time like this.
Well, good evening, Naledi, and good evening to the other panelists. Firstly, I think we need to place all of this in context. For the past 30 years, South Africa has been governed by the African National Congress, and this is the first time that with the initial years being the GNU under the Mandela era. But this is the first time where we find ourselves in a situation where there's forced power sharing, forced by the voters who said, we do not trust any single party to run the country. And so it is understandable that there will be some teething problems at the beginning, but I think we need to get used to this, and hopefully over time the differences will be sorted out such that going forward we can manage power sharing on a number of issues, the budget being probably one of the first such issues and decisions and policies that the GNU has had to make a decision on. So we are obviously concerned about the uncertainty that this creates. We would like a situation where decisions are made, it's very quick and it's very clear the direction where the country is going. But I think placing it in context, this is to be expected. Other countries that have been at it for many, many years, this power sharing, they are still, for instance, taking much, much longer to put together their governments, and there are problems there. So I think on the one level, we would just like to call for calm, because this is not the end of the world. But at the same time, we would also urge political leaders to find each other, because we don't want prolonged uncertainty on the economy.
Yeah, and look, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the bigger concerns about stability moving forward. Do you say, let's not panic, calm must remain, but some concerns must be there. But let's bring in some of our other speakers. And I actually want to start with Dr. Alex Mashilo, who's spokesperson for the South African Communist Party. Just watching on as, members of parliament in the finance committees today debated the fiscal framework. Apologies. And you look at also just some of the wrangling with the political parties as an alliance partners. What's the position of the SACP here on what the ANC really should be doing? And does it look outside of the walls of that Government of National Unity?
Thank you very much. It is very difficult to trust some of the political parties, especially the right-wing parties. Remember that they came up, led by the DA, with a project called the Moonshot Pact. And the key tenet of that pact was that none of them should ever work with the ANC. Later, it was called the Multi-Party Charter. And the key tenet within it was that none of them should work with the ANC. It is therefore surprising that the DA says that Action SA is a sellout party, while in fact it was the first party that sold out all of the parties it consolidated, first in the Moonshot Pact and second in what it called the Multi-Party Charter. So South Africans cannot place any trust and hope in a political party that vacillates in that particular manner. There is no principle. The only thing which can be regarded as a principle on their part is if the situation suits them and no one else. And if we may deal with the idea that the voters said they trust none of the political parties, the voters did not limit the options on which political party should be in the government. It is important to appreciate that political parties that are in parliament are more than the political parties that are in the GNU. That shows you that there were and still are options outside the GNU as it stands.
And that's an interesting one. I mean, a little bit earlier, we did speak to Herman Mashaba, and he's heard in there saying that Action SA, would very much, wouldn't mind being part of this government of national unity. Mr. Swana, perhaps you can assist us with this, because as we're debating whether or not South Africans can afford a 0.5 percentage point hike this year and another one next year, and whether or not that will be passed tomorrow, there is also politics entering and what looks like new opportunities that are appearing here.
Yes, thank you so much, Naledi. There are political opportunities are there. First of all, I think our colleagues, all of them here, are probably in agreement with the majority of the political parties and the people of South Africa that there should have been no tax increases in the first place. It's a wrong idea, totally wrong, but the political opportunity affects the DA more than anybody else. If the DA, for any reason, slips one way or the other, it's clear that there's a bunch of people, Action SA being one, EFF being another one, and a lot more, probably BUSA and others might come to the party and actually start participating more actively in the GNU. So the DA is mistaken in thinking that the movement forward is dependent only on it agreeing with the ANC. That is a big mistake. I hope it's a lesson well learned.
We bring in SAFTU now, Mr. Newton Masuku. I mean, you look in to this conversation, and I wonder if our eyes are looking at what is most important, and that is how this affects the everyday South African, the working class, and how important that budget vote is tomorrow because of the trickle-down effect that it has.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, our primary concern is immediately with our own membership, but of course with the broader working class as a whole. But we want to register that this entire debate about the VAT increase and all of that is based on a false premise. It's a false debate because at the core of it is an attempt to conceptualize the government expenditure as a household. They analogize, the National Treasury analogizes government expenditure as a household. Now, the government is not a household, right? And that is why the National Treasury is obsessed with attaining what it calls primary budget surpluses, because it believes that you have to accumulate the money first and then you save it so that you can spend. The problem is that you are living under capitalism, and capitalism is about sales, and sales presuppose a consumer backed by a purchasing power. So when the government cuts spending into the economy, for instance, say it cuts 2 billion rands into the economy, what it has done is to cut demand in the economy. And therefore, that's why you are seeing the problem of an economy with a sluggish growth. That's one of the major problems. But secondly, is that the minister, I was watching one of the videos, the minister says he creates a false dilemma. He said, I had, on the one hand, to increase taxation, VAT in particular, or to continue with austerity. Now, that's a false dilemma, because the implications of an increase in VAT has more or less the same as if you had imposed austerity, because it shrinks, it diminishes the basket of goods and services that the working class would otherwise afford. And therefore, it creates a false dilemma. So we are saying the entire premise of the argument about taxation and the ups and downs and the debates in parliament, it's a faulty premise. The government has the capacity to spend beyond what it receives in revenue, and it should do precisely that so that it can expand the economy. That's our contention.
Right. Perhaps we should crunch the numbers a little bit, right? And help us, look at, we talked about the trickle-down effect for the working class with Mr. Masuku, but let's talk about what this looks like from the purview of the business community. If we are to see this VAT hike pass tomorrow, implications on the long term?
So I think it's important not to just take a snapshot of the economy today and with the VAT increases or no VAT increases and ask ourselves, how did we get here in the first place? That is the most important question, because if we don't address that, we can increase VAT today. There's no guarantee that we won't have to increase other taxes or VAT in the future. The point about it is that we have had ample opportunities in which we could and should have addressed the problems that the economy faces. Just a couple of numbers. Around 2008, 2009, our debt to GDP, so the debt to GDP ratio was around 21, 22%. It stands today at 75%. So we've been borrowing quite a lot. We don't have much to show for that borrowing. In itself, our debt to GDP ratio is not the worst in the world, provided we can service the debt. You service the debt by growing your economy. So what we have not done enough of is to use the borrowings to finance infrastructure and other growth enhancing expenditure which enable us to service the debt going on. So if we simply take the VAT today, we can argue about, is it, how much of a dent does it make to household budgets, to the rest of the economy? But the point is, unless we deal with the fundamental problem that this economy has not been growing for well over 10 years, we're missing the point. So the big issue here is, are we taking the right decisions about growth in this economy? Once we've got growth going at 3% and higher, our debt to GDP is not the worst in the world, as I've said. We can afford to pay that. But at the moment, we're stuck with this anemic growth, which means that we're getting poorer, our debt is getting more unsustainable, and that is a problem for business and for the rest of the economy.
Yeah, that's the bigger problem.
Absolutely.
That we're dealing with as a country. But of course, we're going to continue to look at some of the conversations and wrangling between the various political parties when it comes to what happens with the impasse that we see now with our budget. Will this budget be passed in that vote tomorrow? And will it see that 0.5 percentage point VAT hike? We'll continue with our panel on the other side of this. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition with myself, Naledi Moleo. We continue, of course, talking about the budget impasse. Will it pass in that budget vote tomorrow? Taking your calls on 010-594-6010. And hearing now from Percy in Pretoria. Percy, good evening. Thanks for calling.
Good evening, Naledi, and good evening to your viewers and the panelists there.
Yes, talk to us.
Naledi, my contribution is based on what the CEO of BUSA just mentioned in terms of the teething period of the GNU. However, I have a different view because parties in the GNU, as we are aware, they have different ideologies. And we most often compare ourselves with other countries internationally, whereas we are a very diverse society and there are different interests for every single party. So therefore, when we talk about the issue of the budget, I think it is important for the budget, for all the parties to actually agree to pass the budget. However, Not that I'm, in favor of the 0.5 increasing the VAT, but the current ANC cannot actually compromise on the policies which are meant to address the past imbalances just to keep the GNU going. That will not be what, like we fought for as, South Africa. That's my input, Naledi. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Percy, thank you so much for that. We really do appreciate it. Taking more of those calls and WhatsApps as well. In fact, we've got a few already that have come in. Let's take a look at some of those. Apologies. G. Chabalala says, evening, Naledi. Let all parties compromise and think of another plan for now. As time goes on, the plan will come up. Forget about increasing VAT. Thank you so much for that, G. Zama Hans says, evening, Naledi. ANC should remove DA and the Freedom Front Plus from this GNU. Replace them with the EFF and MKP. This GNU was formed wrongly. Zama, we appreciate the text. Nkoskhona Manana in Pietermaritzburg says, hi Naledi, the GNU must come up with a firm budget decision that will benefit the country going forward. The political scoring by the few will collapse the economy. And Charles Magombe says, budget impasse, no VAT increase, reduce the cabinet by getting rid of all deputy ministers, reduce perks of government ministers, limit flights between Cape Town and Pretoria. Parliament should be located in Pretoria. That's my take. Charles saying let's cut down on how we spend. We got another call on the line. Deborah is in Pretoria. Deborah, good evening.
Evening.
Yes.
Analyst.
Thank you so much. Deborah, talk to us.
Yes. Then I'm saying it is very wrong of the ANC leading government. The government led by the ANC now doesn't think properly, especially for the poor. However, when I'm talking of the poor, I'm talking of the working class. And the working class is the employed workers and unemployed workers. Whereby in South Africa, we cannot afford this VAT that they are increasing, because they are not thinking for those who cannot afford. They are thinking for themselves. Why? Because they're not touched. They're not touched by this particular VAT hike. So it cannot be correct for the South Africans to be taxed like they are foreigners in their own countries. We are like the second citizens in our own areas of where we reside in the country. Take it for instance, go to a place called Amanskral. We've got majority people who are not working and they are drinking the wastewater. So that's why they were killed by the act of this particular ANC in majority through cholera. So go to Kalinen. Check to Kalinen. Kalinen, there is no running water.
Yeah, Deborah, of course, and I need to just interject there, but I think your point is made certainly around service delivery and where this budget goes, really needing to reach some of those places. Thank you so much for that, Deborah, calling in. I thought that perhaps, Mr. Swana, you could assist us with the process of really what happens next. You do have, for instance, we were saying this earlier, signs that the 0.5 percentage point VAT hike will pass, but the condition might be that National Treasury would need to return to legislature with a revenue proposal within 30 days. I mean, it sounds like yet another long process that we're looking at. So talk to us about the implications of what happens as they continue to legislate and debate on what they do, particularly with revenue.
So, thank you so much. I think South Africans and all of us, business and citizens, there's no reason to panic. This is a very good place where we are now. The law of South Africa protects us in terms of the budget approval process. So we're still within that window where government departments can operate for 6 months since the start of the first 6 months of the financial year without a problem. They can expend 45% of the budget. Now, from here, they've agreed. It appears that what is Mashaba, Action SA, and the ANC have agreed on this, and I think they've put the consortium together to approve this budget. They are going to approve. Then once that is done, then we go to the appropriations and all sorts of things like that. But I think it is safe for South Africans to accept that this first step is now, in essence, concluded. There will be a tweaking, but it's there. But from a stability point of view and a progress point of view, it is for the first time that the budget of South Africa has been publicly scrutinized in the manner that it has been. Compared to accepting the mediocre budgets that have been passed rubber stamp by this parliament for so long, this is a first step. We may not get all the growth that we can possibly get out of this budget, but it's a first step. Next year, it must be more scrutiny, tougher, and more demanding process. We must not rush things and pass things that are wrong. To me, I'm very comfortable with this process. I think we're going in the right direction, and our law protects us. We are within the law. There's no threat to us breaking the law. We're within the law.
And if you'd allow me to stay with you for more of this political analysis then, because an optimistic view that you've shared there, but that is out of an agreement between ANC and Action SA. The words being used as we get to the end of the day is, does the GNU hang in the balance? And I think that's an important question. The cards that the Democratic Alliance can play right now, Mr. Swana, and the likelihood that you could see the Democratic Alliance step away from GNU.
This GNU is solid. There's no problem with the GNU. There's no DA that's going to get out of the GNU. The GNU gives all those parties that are in the GNU, the DA, all these other parties that are smaller than the ANC, an opportunity that they cannot have otherwise. They use state resources to promote their campaigns, to promote their ministers. They are really in the luxury lounge. They are not coming out of the, they will make drama. There's no card that the DA can play. It doesn't have any power to force the ANC to do anything. Now they've been to Trump and tried to ask Trump to interfere in South Africa. They have no real political card. Mashaba is a credible, and Action SA are a credible political party in terms of the right wing in South Africa and the liberals and all that. So that they can replace the DA. There are others waiting as well. BUSA, there's EFF, there's many others. So there's nothing to panic about, really nothing to panic about. Thank you.
Dr. Mashilo, would you agree with that? That GNU is steady and the Democratic Alliance not going anywhere?
It is difficult to say that the GNU stands still. It has to be tested to the limits. So that has to happen. But I want to return to the basis, because it is important for the public to appreciate the class underpinnings, including those spread through our conversation here. If you take total national output measured in rand value terms, or what Business Unity South Africa calls growth, South Africa is the world's leading unequal society. Most of what you call growth goes to the capitalist class compared to the peanut wages that go to the individual workers who produce the profits heaped up by the capitalist class. And the capitalist ideology is growth and more growth and more growth, so that the capitalist class accumulates more from that growth and presses down workers' wages. And if you look at the reality where we are, actually another argument scientifically can be mounted that in fact, even though our growth has been stagnant, there is still room to accumulate state revenue from the little growth that our economy produces. The difficulty is that the business class, that is the capitalist class, prevents the enormous amount of resources that they accumulate in profits and capital from boosting state revenue. Actually, what you have here, and I think Newton makes some of these points, what you have here is a fundamental crisis in the economy and a crisis of inequality. You have someone who earns 3,500 rand complaining about VAT, and another person who accumulates millions and millions in the budget opposing an increase in corporate income tax. So the statements made here are not ideologically neutral, and some of them are just not helpful. The growth that South Africa produces actually is enough to look after our needs. The reality is that the distribution and the redistribution of that growth is so unequal to the extent that it even impacts state revenue. Lastly, on this point, if you look at corporate income tax, that was 50% in the 90s, 35% in 1994, it has come down substantially to 27%. So the reduction in corporate income tax was not just the reduction of that tax, it was also the reduction of state revenue. Secondly, from 1996, when the government adopted the neoliberal policy called GEAR, it substantively reduced international trade tariffs or import duties. The reduction of these trade tariffs was also a reduction of state revenue. So the reduction went to a point where it was to impact severely on state revenue and state commitments to look after the needs of the people. And where we are at the moment, we are at the point where we say, what are the alternatives? So these things have to be looked at historically. And whoever speaks, what the class underpinnings of what they say has to be assessed. Okay. In particular, I am directing this to Business Unity South Africa because it represents the capitalist class who accumulate profit and are wealthy in a society where other people are dying of poverty.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Mashilo. And I'll give Mr. Mathe an opportunity to respond a little bit later, but I want to give Mr. Masuku a final shot here. I mean, Dr. Mashilo talks about the class underpinnings. There's a sense, as Dr. Mashilo describes it in the idea that he puts forward, that we're prioritizing making sure that the budget is passed over what happens to the most vulnerable in our community. So dealing with the transformative agenda versus ensuring that you do have stability in the upper ranks. What do you say to that?
Well, it's absolutely true what Dr. Mashilo has pointed out. In fact, you see it not only with the Treasury, but you see it even with the South African Reserve Bank. So every time it ramps up interest rates, for instance, in an attempt to fight, as they say, inflation, they ask a question which is implicit. Which class in society must shoulder the burden of restoring the balance of capitalism? And it unequivocally says the working class. Similarly, the National Treasury did that just here. It asked the question, we are short of revenue and we have to get it from somewhere. Which class in society is going to bear the burden of that? And it unequivocally said it is the working class that has to carry that. So I completely agree with that particular analysis. But also I have to differ extremely with your guest in the studio there, who begins with this category that is thrown around to scaremonger the working class, the debt to GDP ratio. Now, and they say, well, it is at 75%, and therefore, so they are creating the impression that the South African government it's at the mercy of the bondholders. But the South African government is not at the mercy of the bondholders. And all you have to do is to look at what the National Treasury calls the handbook on primary dealers, which deals with how government bonds are issued and how they are bought and the regulations that regulate who should buy them, under what circumstances, and the interest charge on those bonds. You will realize that the power dynamic between the so-called lenders and the government is such that it's in the hands of the government. The government can kick out the bond buyers, can decide who can buy, can decide who can sell, right, and so on and so forth. So all these constraints are self-imposed so that they can open room for the capital class to accumulate. But secondly and finally, is that it's not only the 0.5 percentage point that is problematic in the budget itself that we take issue with. I mean, even the model that they are proposing for their so-called growth, it rests on what they call Operation Vulindlela, which is a glorified attempt from World Bank tutelage, by the way, to privatize water provision, electricity, and all of that by stealth. So they are saying you are going to bring in the public sector, you are going to de-risk it. Bring it, I mean, the private sector, you are going to de-risk it, bring it, allow it to invest and accumulate profits. In other words, we are going to carry the risk of the private sector, and the private sector is going to accumulate the profits at the expense of the public. We disagree completely with that.
A mouthful. Thank you so much for that, though. We're going to give Mr. Khulekani Mathe an opportunity to respond, but also to give us recommendations. What is it that we should ideally see tomorrow? That and more on the other side of this. Welcome back. So will the budget pass? The all-important question that we ask ourselves as we get closer to that budget vote tomorrow. Taking calls on 0105946010. Philip is in Tembisa. Philip, good evening. Philip, yes, Philip. Good evening.
Yes, good evening, ma'am.
Talk to us,
Hello.
sir. We're listening.
Oh, yes. You're speaking to Philip. I'm in Tembisa in Vosomo's informal settlement. My issue is I am not a politician and I don't support any, but I'm a voter in South Africa. I can see that there is only one party that is fighting for us as the poor people, citizens, the Democratic Alliance. And I can't see any other political party. There were so many of political parties that were against of this VAT. But now I don't know, suddenly there is a turnaround. Hence, you see the populist of Abu Mashaba supporting this budget. And they wanted to have on a gravy train. And that is the problem to us as the voters of South Africa. And then, yes, so I think let us rally behind Democratic Alliance. I've never supported Democratic Alliance, but I think now I should support for Democratic. Any political party that will be fighting for the interest of the poor, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Philip. An interesting point of view, certainly. Patrick is in Durban. Patrick, good evening.
Hi, how are you, Naledi?
Well, sir, talk to us.
Yeah, no, okay, mine is just a short comment. I think the problem that is standing in the way of this GNU going forward is the arrogance. The arrogance of especially the ANC, as well as the DA. Why I'm saying that is because it's not difficult to find a solution to this problem currently, as long as these two political parties approach each other with an open mind, to listen to each other, not to sort of dictate what should happen. The ANC has been in power for quite some time, so they've gotten used to this thing of doing things by themselves. So I think it has not sunk into them that they are now not in charge. So they have to, in a way, try to understand that they are not in charge and they should consult. And sometimes they are not going to get away with the things that they want to do.
Yeah.
And it's not wrong not to get away with those things. They are not in charge. And definitely they should not be in charge in 2029. That's my wish. So, but they should approach each other with an open mind to seek a solution. If they can't find a solution, then they can't both win.
Okay. Yeah, Patrick, thank you so much for that. Patrick in Durban calling in there. We're going to get towards wrapping it up, though. Mr. Mathe, your final thoughts. I mean, there's a lot to respond to from Dr. Mashilo and certainly Mr. Masuku as well. But what it is as we close off, that ideally we should be seeing today, pass the budget with the 0.5%.
So let me start by saying that, look, we all agreed that increasing taxes in a weak economy such as ours is not ideal. So under ideal conditions, we shouldn't be raising taxes as is proposed. But we must deal with the situation that we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in a situation where the books don't balance. They don't balance not because of yesterday's decisions. They don't balance because of decisions over a period of times in which we as a country, as society, have been complicit because we did not hold our government accountable for the things that they chose to spend on, such that we find ourselves with these imbalances. So we would say, let's shoulder and let's take the pain together but make sure that we take the right decisions starting now going forward so that we can increase. I mean, we agree that with the panelists that we have an economy with high levels of inequality. We've got to address that. But the assertion made by Dr. Mashilo that the current levels of economic growth are enough to address our challenges is not backed by the facts. And I don't want South Africans to be fooled into thinking that we can get by with these kinds of levels. We've got to commit to higher levels of growth. Look, anywhere in the world, if you want to lift people out of poverty, you need higher levels of growth, and there's just no other way. And we need to commit to that and commit to growth-enhancing policies, growth-enhancing expenditure.
All right, I need to move towards closing it up. Dr. Mashilo, I'll give you one last bite as well. If you were to throw the bones, what do you think we'll see take place tomorrow, or what would you like to see?
No, thank you very much. Let me respond immediately. We need higher levels of shared growth. We don't need higher levels of growth in which the capitalist class take the lion's share and relegate crumbs to the working class, and the state will be increasing taxes on the crumbs. By the way, globally today, you look at the United States, you look at many economies, there is an adjustment in taxes, and these taxes affect us. The US has just increased its tariffs on steel and aluminum, a decision dating back to 2018. They have done it again. They have made a new announcement now that impacts us. So it cannot be a statement backed by facts that we should not consider increasing taxes. The question is, which taxes must we increase? Our taxes, for example, in the automotive industry are 20% lower, and I'm referring to import duties, are 20% lower than the World Trade Organization bound tariff rates. If you look on our roads, they are dominated by imports from India. Compare India's taxes or import duties of vehicles to ours. They are 60 to 70% to 105. That is why we are losing in this unfair
So give me a clear recommendation here. I'm running out of time.
I just wanted to highlight that. I just wanted to highlight that. So the budget must not be approved with a tax that will weigh heavily on the workers and the poor, while we live in an unequal society where people are accumulating millions that are not taxed sufficiently. We need a stronger progressive taxation to resolve this in case and leave the poor so that we do not push them deeper into poverty.
All right, thank you so much. Dr. Swana, Mr. Swana, your final thoughts. What should be done tomorrow? And I'm keen to hear if you think we'll see any surprises in that budget vote.
I think the budget vote, the budget is going to be passed tomorrow. Number two, the two taxes that were increased, which is VAT and the personal income tax, within the next, give it 30 days or so, is going to be reversed, and there will be no tax increase. That is what I had. By May, but during May, it will be finished.
All right, let's make those comparisons then tomorrow. Certainly, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much to our viewers as well for participating. Newton Masuku, SAFTU spokesperson, Sandile Swana, political analyst, Dr. Alex Mashilo, spokesperson for the South African Communist Party, and in studio with us, Mr. Khulekani Mathe, CEO of Business Unity South Africa. An absolute pleasure. We've got your headlines at the top of the hour. We'll take a short break now. Do stay with us.